Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order at 3:37. Maybe. Let's have a roll call, pretty please.
Director Hedges?
Here.
Director Thielke?
Here.
Chair Bagman?
Here. Would you all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Ready to begin.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And this is going to be our new president. I'd like you to all meet Igor. Let's see. Director announcements, reports, and comments. Do we have anything from the mutuals?
Well, one little tidbit. We are still producing 350 gallons a minute of water out of our canyon, which is pretty unheard of for this time of year.
That's
And very
350. That's 350 gallons per minute? Or?
350 gallons per minute of potable water flowing out of our two surface sources in the tunnel in our canyon.
Terrific. Thank you. Do we have anything from the Water Conservation District? No, we don't have anything. City of Ojai, we don't have anything either. Casitas Municipal Water District, the lake level, are you ready?
Yes.
We're at 41.5% full. That leaves in storage 98,713 acre feet. Any questions? They said they were going to start yesterday. I don't know where they are right now. Community Facilities District, also known as CFD. Anything, Richard? Okay. General Manager comments?
I'll make it brief. I was gone most of October, off on a road trip, it was good to see the rest of the country because they live a lot different than people on the left and the right coast.
They do.
Yeah, so it's good to see that. Just wanted to mention, there's a special meeting, and you'll see it at the end of your agenda for December 11th. The focus of that meeting is going to be a workshop to talk about developing the groundwater sustainability plan. We'll put an agenda together, but I'm thinking initially that what we want to do is cover what we think would be an outreach approach and get the board's buy-off on that, because there's a couple of different ways you can go. I want to outline the tasks that need to be completed for the groundwater sustainability plan. And then in a Gantt chart that I drafted, it's certainly not anywhere near perfect, but I envision along the way there needs to be some workshops with the board
Sure.
that allows you to review progress of the document and to understand what's been accomplished, what needs to be accomplished, and how well are we doing meeting the timeline toward completing the plan for January of 2022.
What time do you contemplate this
Well,
meeting?
you talked about the last meeting at 3:30, and the same with the December 17th regular board meeting, 3:30. So if you want those changed, I guess we need to know.
December 11th is CMWD at 3.
Those were the only available times
Well, I may not make it.
here.
Duty calls.
Holding it later, will that be any better?
Depends on what's on the agenda, Jim.
Okay.
And it also depends on if it's available
Yeah.
chambers.
Agreed.
I did have
Yeah.
it noted for OBGMA at 3.
Yeah, I mean, this will be a special meeting, so there's only a 24-hour notice requirement.
Right.
but it'd be helpful to know both what the availability of the council chambers and what your availability will be. I mean, as best as you can. I'm sure they haven't even considered an agenda for their meeting yet.
I'm sure they haven't.
So just keep that in mind, and we'll keep bothering you until we hear something different.
Okay, that's okay.
Thank you.
Anything else, John?
No, that's it.
All right. Basin status report. Jordan, say your whole name, please.
My name is Jordan Kier,
No.
Kier Groundwater.
The rest of it. I want to hear you pronounce it.
Technically, and in sworn deposition, my name is Jordan Lee Navy Kier,
That's it.
professional geologist and certified hydrogeologist.
Thank you. It's a
How's
great
that?
name.
Thank you. It's worked for a while. What's also worked for a while is the basin. We measured, downloaded the data from Keywall area today at 139.36 feet below ground surface, relatively shallow. May be approaching our annual nadir. Of course, we're in November now, so we would expect it to be right around the corner, if not already here. If you picked up a copy of the yellow sheet and the one that's on the table in front of you, this one is sort of the raw data output from the level loggers. That this is in the Elrod well, and what you'll notice on this one, scale-wise here, you've got this year, 2018 to 19 water year, 2017 to 18, 2016 to 17 water years. This is about a 3-year cycle, 2 relatively wet years and 1 relatively dry year in that interim. The most recent peak being July 1st, 2019, where the depth to water was 117.78 feet, and we calculated a 76% basin capacity, or 60,080 acre feet. Today, we're down off of that, down to 139.36 feet, or 72%, and 57,600 acre feet, which jives pretty well with what was extracted over that same period during that groundwater recession period time of about 2,500 acre feet from the basin wells, as shown later in the agenda package. What also is shown there is really what's coming in and coming out of the basin, and it's always nice to hear Peter's comments about 350 gallons per minute coming down the canyon.
Yeah.
That's a good amount of water, and a lot of it's going to be percolating into the basin if it's not diverted to Senior Canyon Mutual Water Company. And there are other streams and creeks that contribute probably similar volumes of water. I would suspect that the greatest contribution is from Senior Canyon and feeding directly into San Antonio Creek. Much of that percolates to the basin, usually before it gets to Grand Avenue Bridge, and by the time one would traverse the basin, you're going to go across a good mile or
Jim,
so
this is Russ.
of dry
Our meeting
of
started
dry
at
San Antonio Creek surface flow, which then resurfaces around Sol Park,
Okay.
near the golf course. And what we've been doing is measuring every month the actual flow in CFS. It can be converted to gallons per minute. It can be converted to acre feet per year. And we've done that. So on the 29th of end of July and beginning of end of August, end of September, and then most recently on October 26th, we've measured 1.77 CFS, 1.14 CFS, 1.45 CFS, and 1.09 CFS, leaving the basin as surface water over the bedrock just south of the Arroyo Prieto Santa Ana Fault, which constitutes the basin boundary across San Antonio Creek. On average, that's about 1.36 CFS. And being that a CFS is convertible to gallons per minute, that average 1.36 becomes about 611 gallons per minute. So imagine basically twice the amount of water that's coming in at Senior Canyon, leaving the basin at San Antonio Creek. Okay. But that elevation is still higher than the 139.36 feet we have in the producing section of the basin. So there's a lot of contribution coming from those shallower aquifers, what we call the perch zones. Over that July, August, September, and October period, we calculated about 326 acre feet of water leaving the basin as surface flow. That's quite a bit. And it's good to quantify that because that's where a good amount of water is going to escape the basin out of storage. If it were flowing that much year-round, you'd be about 978 acre feet per year. But we know it flows much greater than that. This is a drier period of time, and the amount of surface flow we typically expect to be at its nadir around October. So we'll see what the coming months bring, but we anticipate likely some increase as plants begin to lose their leaves and go into hibernation periods and become more dormant and are transpiring less water. So input, output, basin storage, there you have it.
Excellent report, thank you. Gordon, any
Yes,
questions?
What's this again?
Okay, so this is the raw data output from the loggers. So this is what you would see if you put your telephone with the right app, literally, right next to the wells that have the data loggers in them.
Okay.
And what you're looking at is basically 3 years of data, 3.5, all of the 2017-18, 2016 to 17 water year, 2017 to 18, and 2019 water year. On the x-axis. On the y-axis is basically feet above the logger plus atmospheric pressure in feet of water. So it goes from 32 to 190 feet, and you can see that when it goes up to the right, water levels are getting shallower. When it goes down to the right, water levels are getting deeper. We then convert those feet over the logger measurements that are directly taken by the logger to depth to water, and that's then what goes into this water level hydrograph that includes data from this well at this frequency every 90 minutes or so for the past few years, all the way back to the 1940s when the manual water level measurements were all that were taken. Also shown on the red curve, and I didn't mention this, is the temperature. That's the red line. And the x-axis is the same, but the y-axis is on the left, and that's in degrees Fahrenheit. And it's just really steady, right around that 65, 66 degrees.
Okay, thank you.
It's said that the average mean annual temperature of a region is reflected in its groundwater temperature. And if you think about what the mean annual average air temperature at Ojai is, it's probably pretty similar to that.
Sometimes it is mean.
But you know what they say about averages, Russ, right?
Yes.
You know what the elevation of that bedrock where the basin overflows into San Antonio Creek is?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to.
I was just curious as what that elevation is in relation to the water level in the key well.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's shallower or higher elevation than what's the key well depth. I think the key well elevation, I don't know off the top of my head again, but in the delta, we've looked at that before, and it's higher elevation at the discharge point. We'll confirm that though for next month.
Okay, is that what you got? All right. We have some public in our audience. Would anybody like to address the board on items that are not on the agenda? Carol, do you want to tell us how the cow ate the cabbage here? Okay, thanks. Seeing none, we'll move on to consent items, which is the approval of the minutes of September 26, 2019, regular meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, deletions? They're not
in.
there.
They're not there.
So that's taken care of. We'll get those next month, apparently. We'll move on to item 8, action items. The 8A is the board officer election. And this is part of our, the official title is the Ojai Basin Groundwater Management Agency Rules and Regulations for Internal Operations. At section 3.05, it talks about the election of the president. And we have to do that every 2 years. So that's what we're doing tonight. I will ask for nominations for president first.
Russ, may I ask a question first here? With 2 people missing, I don't think it's appropriate to go through this process with just 3 of us, with 40% of the representation not here. Can we do that legally?
Sure, we can continue this
I
if you want to.
I would prefer tabling it until everybody's here.
Everybody want to table it? We can do that. We will move this to a date and time certain for the next meeting. That was quick.
So that would be December 17th is the next
Yes.
regular meeting. But you shouldn't do that at a special meeting.
No.
If we could get 5 people there, it'd be
Oh.
a good idea.
Okay, that will be continued to a date and time certain. Well, maybe at least a date. The time is not really that important. 8B is the treasurer's report for September 2019. Budget spreadsheet and extraction charges by period are included in your agenda. Are there any questions for 8B? Hearing none, or do you want to look at it some more?
Well, what jumps out to me about this is the attorney fees of $4,306. Can we get some idea of the time, what part of the year that covers, whether it's monthly, whatever, and what the nature of those expenses are? Just a brief overview.
Absolutely. Every month I submit invoices that detail the time and the hours, and that's not reflected in here, but CC certainly has access to that, and if you'd like that provided with the staff report, we can do that. I mean,
Okay.
it just depends on what the pleasure of the board is.
Okay. Is that sort of a typical amount per a monthly, that 4,300?
That is actually high.
Okay.
I mean, the typical amount, I think, is around 2,500.
That's what I'd remembered, yeah.
And that might be 2 months back to back, I'm not
Okay.
sure. And I'd have to go back and look at the invoice to see exactly what the time was spent, but it jumped out to me as well.
Yeah, my memory of it, as far as a kind of a regular parameter, was about somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000, so it jumped out, yeah.
I do have September's invoice. I was hoping to get it signed for you, and it's $2,031.
Okay, CC, do you know why there's the amount of 4,306 and change?
I don't have it with me.
Okay.
Well, I can
Richard?
guess. That's when we went through the gymnastics of responding to the state on the alternative plan. I think you put a lot of effort into that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And then there was meetings at the Casitas MWD's offices, and there's other time spent in that regard.
Thank you.
But
Any other
year to
questions?
date, the total, it's actually less than what's budgeted, for year to date, it looks like, so we're still within the budget.
Thanks, Larry. Any other questions, changes, or additions for the pleasure of the board?
I move we accept the treasurer's report.
I'll second it.
We're ready for our roll call.
Director Hages,
Yes.
Director Thilke,
Yes.
Chair
What's his name?
Eckerly.
Yes, thank you. What's next? Our next action item is a resolution for sustainability plan grant funding proposal. John, you want to?
Yes, I'd like to give you an introduction on this. The board, I'm sure, is aware, and if you're not, the board did not authorize me to move forward with working on a grant proposal. However, there's an opportunity here. I am not going to bill you for my time on this. I'm going to end up spending quite a few hours, but I'm not going to bill you for my time because I think it's important for the agency to at least have an opportunity to get a grant. And so, as part of that process, the grant proposal process was to close October 31st. So we wouldn't even normally been here tonight talking about this because I would have made the filing anyways. But since DWR came out with an email that said they're postponing it 2 weeks because of the fires that were going on, so I decided to bring this resolution before you tonight and to have this discussion to make sure you're comfortable proceeding. Now, what this all really kind of boils down to is dollars. The grant proposal, the grant awards are going to be from $400,000 to $2 million per agency. The minimum is $400,000. So what that means is through this grant proposal process, we've got to submit a document they call the budget, grant proposal budget. $400,000 would have to come from the state, and then an additional $100,000 would be your local share. It'd be the 25% share. So you're talking about $500,000.
25%.
25%.
That's not bad.
It's a lot better, and you're going to spend probably $100,000 anyways. And so this just gives you a lot more room and flexibility. There's, Jordan's got some work to do, but this could certainly bolster that effort. Might get Peter involved in some of this if we need his services. There's a stakeholder engagement and outreach that's going to have to be done, and we've talked a little bit about getting help on that, and we'll be bringing something forward on that probably pretty soon. And then there's a grant administration. They've got a category that you got to provide quarterly billing and quarterly reports, and I mean, there's all sorts of work that has to go on here. While I'm not looking for work, if the board accepts, if you're awarded a grant and you accept this, the grant administration is going to be some work. It's going to have to spend some time on this. But in this resolution before you tonight would give you the impression, and I mean, certainly you're authorizing to enter into an agreement, you're authorizing the general manager to direct and prepare the necessary data and then execute the grant agreement. However, this is DWR's words, and I would recommend, and I'm going to suggest we leave it like this. I'm asking the board to approve this because it needs to be part of the grant submittal package. However, I would commit to you, I would not sign a grant agreement without coming back before this board and seeing if you're willing to do that, if the funds are awarded to the agency. So I think it's an opportunity. Get some money. We've got to update the website because that has to be a tool that's used for outreach to stakeholders in the community. And again, Jordan's work. There's going to be the administrative effort, the stakeholder engagement. My thinking right now, that's going to be at least 4 meetings with preparation work that's got to go on by 3 or 4 different people to get ready for those meetings
You bet.
and engage stakeholders. And then there's also the board process of how many workshops are you gonna have and what kind of input do you wanna have through, along the process? So tonight I'm asking, for you to approve this resolution with the understanding that I would not sign any documents, but would come back to you for authorization before that were to happen.
Good, John, thank you. Board members?
Is there any downside to doing this, John, that you can?
I don't,
Okay.
I mean, worst case, you just say, well, we don't want the grant agreement.
Yeah.
We don't sign the agreement, so. And I would have to think, even though the minimum is gonna be a $400,000 grant, and you're gonna have to put $100,000 with that, my guess is you're probably not gonna spend it all, which will probably get them a little uneasy, because the state, for some reason, when they do these grant proposals, they like to make sure you spend all the money. But if you don't need it, why spend it? And I guess part of the problem is then they have to go out and find another way to get rid of the money. That's the way they seem
They
to
hate
operate.
that.
They hate doing that.
They
so.
really do.
Yeah, I guess that, I don't think there's gonna be any requirement that says you have to spend it all.
Yeah.
But, I guess the downside is you're gonna have to put up $100,000. But again, I was thinking with Jordan's work and my time and, if we get somebody in on the outreach effort and the website update, and CC's gonna have to spend some time on this, we're gonna spend that $100,000 pretty easy.
I
And it's
can-
over 2 years.
I can see 4 people sitting at this dais who will be glad that we have money to spend.
Yeah.
Board members?
What's the deadline for submitting the budget and the work plan?
The grant proposal has to be submitted by a week from Friday. So it's pretty quick. The work plan is, I'm really basing it off of what I put together previously through a Gantt chart, excuse me. Well, it's a grant chart too, but I think ultimately the final work plan will be outlined in the grant agreement. And so I'm sure there will be some tweaking of whatever we submit through that proposal, because they're gonna probably wanna see some more things done. They're gonna specifically say, they're gonna tell us that they want their quarterly reports, and they want the quarterly billing, and they want certain other things. And so I didn't bring all that information, it's still a work in progress. This just happens to be one of the attachments. But I do have a scope, again, based on what I think it may look like, but it could expand to some degree.
Well, it's been done before, and, they're good at telling us what we should do, even though they believe that local groundwater management is up to the locals, which really is kind of hollow language.
And this submittal is a lot simpler, because we're not doing construction. So they're saying, they're probably gonna look at this and, to some degree, overlook a lot of things that you would normally expect to see in a construction grant. Because they want they want CEQA, they want all sorts of things in construction. SGMA specifically called out the CEQA, groundwater sustainability plans are exempt from CEQA. And so this application will be a lot simpler. Ultimately, I think the final scope of the work is gonna be in the grant agreement. And that's where you got a choice to say, we will accept the grant or we're not. Because we don't, whether you like the scope or not, will
Right.
determine what you decide ultimately on accepting the agreement.
You
And
have something, Peter?
just to clarify, there's 2 separate grant solicitations. The deadline for the first one is November 15th, so a week from Friday, I think that is. And then the second one, under Prop 68, and the funding that was available through that proposition, that opens sometime in early 2020. They haven't established a date, so 2 shots at it, theoretically.
Thank you. Okay, is the board ready to commit?
What do you think?
Well, my only concern is we're gonna spend a lot of money just going through this process before we know we have a grant, and we really don't have a work plan yet. I know John's put together a draft, but we haven't really discussed it, so that makes me a little nervous we may be committing to do far more than really what's necessary. But if we don't have to spend it all, I suppose that's, we can figure out some other way to spend it, but.
Yeah, we could, never mind. I could think of some places to spend the money, but
Based on the budget template, I mean, when I talked about simplicity, they have 4 categories. And then they've got a second page where we're gonna detail it a little more, but the categories still remain. And it's grant administration, stakeholder engagement and outreach, GSP development, and then monitoring and assessment. So those are the 4 main categories, and we just have to move some things in there. And a lot of that GSP development work is gonna be what Jordan's gonna be working on, he submitted in his previous proposal.
see, we really do need a depth discrete monitoring well down toward the confluence, don't we, Jordan? And a meter.
Yeah, there are a handful of items of that nature that could fall under the umbrella of a groundwater sustainability plan.
Yeah.
They've also been funded through the Wildlife Conservation Board grant.
Oh, yeah.
So
Forgot that money.
there is that facet that could be considered, and it really leads very well into the question I have for John on this. Can the matching funds be a grant from another source? For example, could we say drilling that depth discrete monitoring well is absolutely critical to the groundwater sustainability plan, or metering the flow in the creek on discharge, et cetera, things that would be funded through the Wildlife Conservation Board grant? Is that an acceptable source of matching funds?
I don't know for sure, Jordan. I do know that they will also accept in-kind services
Yeah.
toward the dollar amount, so we need to track that. Unfortunately, any time I put into this grant proposal that I don't charge you for is not gonna be eligible for reimbursement of the grant. They don't reimburse for preparation of the grant, only after the
Well, you know
grant's
what
been awarded.
you know, you can fix that. You can charge us. We'll get it back.
Could you give us an overview of how much money you've budgeted for each of these categories? I don't recall. I saw your spreadsheet, but that was quite a while ago.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think grant administration's gonna be somewhere between 10 and 15%. And the bulk of the rest of the money will be in stakeholder engagement, but I still see that as maybe 25%. GSP would be, the groundwater sustainability plan will probably be 50% of that, would be my guess at this point. I don't have the numbers ferreted out because I was working with DWR to understand, well, is the 400,000, does that include the local share, or is the local share in addition to that? And they finally just got back to me.
It's in
So
addition.
it's an addition.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that at least 50% of the GSP development, $250,000 is gonna go into the development of the GSP itself. Stakeholder outreach, depends on how many meetings you have, but that could be $25,000, $30,000 a meeting, depending on the time and effort and the work that's gotta be accomplished to do that. I mean, you're talking about outreach material and printing and, billboard kind of stuff and staff time and everything else.
Treasurer's report that we just adopted.
Yeah.
It's got money, we've got money in the bank, and we will continue to have money in the bank. That pay-as-you-go can add up to $100,000, and that's eligible for the matching grant.
Yeah. And to go back to Director Hages' comment, again, my commitment is the grant agreement would come back to the board for approval. That will have a much more detailed scope of work in it.
Yeah,
And so,
my only concern is are we gonna have room to move that money around?
According to the rules, probably.
I mean, if you put
I would-
25% into community outreach and we don't need that much, but we need more in technical services. Are we gonna be able to move it around?
I think so.
I would think so, but I'll verify that. Can we move money?
Advice, Bruce? Any advice?
Well, our executive director says you're pretty much tied to the amount you estimate for the tasks in your
Okay.
evaluation, so if you don't have enough money, that's kind of too bad. If you have too much, I don't know if you can move it around. I think he thinks not. The other comment I would make is about the, whether another state grant can be used for a local match. Our Brian Bondia said it can't be. If you have a federal grant, you could, but it can't be another state grant.
Okay.
That's right.
You might want to check on that, though. That's my understanding.
I think, I've heard that before too, but it was in a different milieu. It wasn't for a GSP, it was for, development projects for water issues. I think the rules are probably all the same.
Can you write language into the grant that will say there's designated monies and there'll be undesignated monies? Or that would, so if there's undesignated monies that are part of the grant, then they could be transferred to another category if you run out of money in that category.
Let me change your language just a little bit. You want to make that discretionary funding that
There
are,
you go.
dedicated to a specific project, and then undiscretionary, funds that are not discretionary, that you can use however you want.
Somewhere,
I don't know if that's
I don't know
doable.
if that's doable either, so. But
Yeah.
it's something to consider if they would allow it.
Well, I think the fundamental question here is that the board understands that we do have to prepare a groundwater sustainability plan. We're not going to get out of that. So we may as well take this first step and start the process, and let's have a look at how far up towards our neck we're getting into the mud. Because we can always say, we don't want to do that, right?
And Peter, you were saying that there's another grant program, Prop 68, is it similar?
Yeah, my understanding is it's substantially similar, and both are called out in this resolution.
Mhm.
So this resolution would authorize application under the one that's coming up, the deadline, and then as well as future application, the one in early 2020.
Well, the big question, of course, Richard, is whether or not it's 25% match or 50%. It makes a big difference in how much we have to pay.
Yeah.
The other issue, as I see it, is timing. If they're not coming out with the request for proposals for that other grant till sometime next year, it's going to be 3 to 6 months before they award anything.
Easy.
This one's going to be, they're talking about, I think, March of awarding grants, and so, we're going to be burning some time, and we've got 2 years to get this done. And if we, one way or the other, it's got to get done irrespective of the grant proposal. But if we're waiting on a grant later in next year, then it gets a little tighter on the funding for the agency.
Yeah, my only problem is I just don't feel comfortable with throwing numbers into categories that we're gonna have to live by. That's the only thing. We don't really have a very good feel at all for what those numbers are gonna be, so.
John, do we have an opportunity to change those pots?
I don't know. I'll find out. I do have a Gantt chart that was given to me from a consultant that I can look at. I don't think it tells me the hours that they put in there, but I'll take a look at that again
Okay.
and see if I can find anything else. I don't know, maybe Upper Ventura River's got something I could look at as well, because you got a $2 million grant, didn't you? Oh, 600, okay.
I remember Jordan and I going through trying to figure out what numbers to use for the tasks we have for our data gap, and it was kind of the back of the envelope sort of thing. And
Well,
we're kind of stuck with those numbers now.
That's kind of the way I feel on this. It's,
So it takes some quick estimating and putting something down and going with it, and hoping you're in the ballpark.
Well, just so you know, I've got plenty of envelopes you can use.
I mean, I'd rather put a lot of, quite a bit of the money in the GSP development,
Yeah, that's right.
because quite frankly, I don't think the stakeholder engagement's going to take as much. The grant administration will take some time. But, I don't want to burn up, I don't want to put down $100,000 for grant administration.
Well, if
but-
the attendance today of board members is any indication, it may not take too long.
I'd rather be heavy on the technical side of it,
Yeah, the monitoring and
You're right.
assessment, a lot of flexibility there.
yeah.
And there's a lot to monitor, there's a lot to assess. And, that's the base of the pyramid.
Yeah.
I'll put some numbers together. I'll send it over to Jordan. You can give me your wisdom on it.
And really, on the community outreach, we really have two issues that we're gonna be dealing with. One is going to be any pumping restrictions that we intend to adopt, and the other is gonna be surface flows. So I don't think there's too many people losing sleep over seawater intrusion or land subsidence.
Well,
So,
Not
I mean,
really.
we're gonna be focusing on those two, and it isn't like there's 10,000 people that have an interest in that, that are gonna be all excited about it, so it's gonna be pretty much
Richard,
one-on-one.
they really are going to, the pumpers at least, are going to know if we're going to raise the pumping charge again.
No, I mean, if we implement a pumping allocation plan, we're gonna have to have buy-in. That's the thing the state's gonna look for.
We have to think about the upcoming adjudication that's still on tap.
Yeah, all I'm saying is the public outreach is intended to satisfy the state that we involve the community in decision-making. So,
Right.
and all I'm saying is there's only really two contentious issues. Reduce pumping, if that's what we have to do, and the other is surface water flows. So we're gonna have a group of special interests that are gonna wanna be involved in the surface water flow issues, and we're going to have a group of pumpers who are gonna wanna be involved in any restrictions on pumping that we have to adopt. So I think our public outreach is gonna be pretty focused.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I did put the categories down that Jordan had put in his proposal. Subsidence analysis is definitely not going to take an awful lot of effort. Seawater intrusion is not going to take a whole lot of discussion. But we do need to look at water quality. We need to look at groundwater storage depletion, chronic lowering, depletion of connected surface water. And then, of course, we've got all the work that's got to go to collection of data, got to update the groundwater model, those kind of things. And then identify and modify any projects or programs that we need to.
That's
Put in the
that's
plan.
all I'm saying. I think your estimate of 15% for grant administration is probably reasonable. But I would trade some of that money for public, if there's only three categories, I would move some of that money from public outreach to the development of the GSA.
I think there's one more, Richard.
Yeah, there was a monitoring and assessment,
Okay,
but I think that's more of, monitoring your programs and things you've identified in your plan, and then you're going to have to provide a report to DWR every 5 years, I think it is, about what you identified in your plan as things that you need to do in order to have sustainability in the basin.
I think probably one of the more expensive things that we're going to have to do for the groundwater sustainability plan is monitor surface water and its impact on groundwater-dependent ecosystems.
yeah, I agree, so can this grant money be used
Yes.
to implement after our plan has been adopted and submitted?
Well, the way I understand it, this is not construction project per se. And so I think it's develop the plan, and then maybe some of the money can be used for monitoring activities, but I don't know if that certainly doesn't include putting a well in, another monitoring well, but I think maybe you can get away with additional monitoring equipment at locations.
Yeah, stream flow, that kind
Yeah,
of
that
thing.
kind of stuff.
The monthly stream flow monitoring that I mentioned earlier this evening, or this afternoon, was, I think would certainly fit the mold of the monitoring and assessment task herein. And to the extent that we can quantify that, some of that might already be considered a matching fund already. Assuming that the grant agreement timelines work out. But that certainly is the sort of thing that they typically would accept as part of a groundwater sustainability plan, monitoring and assessment.
Yeah, the only thing is, I think, I don't know if it's here, you can't be reimbursed for anything prior to a certain date, and I can't remember what date that was. I want to say it was, I don't know, 2017 or 18. I don't exactly remember, but we could certainly come up with some in-kind types of monitoring activities that probably after that date.
Probably.
The Upper Ventura River has had some money in its grant for a monitoring well, so you can get some use of money for that.
Yeah, again, I don't have a problem with this. I'd like, if we're stuck with the numbers that we're gonna submit, I would like to make sure there's enough to do the heavy lifting. I mean, I would rather pay for the balance of the community outreach from our own funds, if that's what it comes to, than be
We could do that.
stuck, with some major technical work that has to be done that we have to nickel and dime on. So I think that's gonna be the important part of it.
Well, I think we will find ways to make up that $100,000 in matching funds pretty easily. I don't think that's a problem, but that would allow us to make sure that the $400,000 gets spent on the development of the GSP, which is going to take,
Got one more
Bruce.
comment. It seemed like a good part of the stakeholder engagement process, as I understand it, is responding to public comments. It's almost like when you do an EIR and people submit comments, you have to respond to each of the comments, and that takes, depending on the level of involvement by the community, that can take a lot of time.
Yeah.
Just
Right.
doing the writing and all that kind of thing, so.
sure.
And it's gonna take technical people to respond to a lot of them, so.
Okay, any other questions or concerns? The pleasure of the board.
Well, trusting that John is gonna nail this right on the head. We won't have any money left or
No pressure.
If not,
cost any more than we receive, I'll make a motion that we submit this, or approve resolution 2019-2.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Now we need a roll call.
Director Hages,
Yes.
Director Thielke,
Yes.
Chair Baggerly.
Yes. Great. We'll move on to item 9, discussion items. 9A is conjunctive use planning. Do we have anything to report?
No.
We have nothing to report. That's ongoing, right?
Yes.
9B, City of Ventura amended cross complaint, Ventura River. You want me to start off, or do you want to?
Whatever you feel like, Russ, if you
You
want.
take the laboring oar, please.
Absolutely. So recently, within the last month and a half or so, there's been a settlement between the Santa Barbara Channel Keeper and the City of Ventura with respect to the original complaint that was filed. And they have agreed to, City of Ventura agreed to do several management type, habitat enhancement type measures down in the lower reach of the Ventura River. They also agreed to pay Channel Keeper's attorney's fees, which I think was a big incentive for the Channel Keeper to settle the lawsuit. In any event, that portion of the litigation has been resolved. There's going to be some things that happen in the interim between those two parties or pursuant to the agreement. The important thing for the Upper Ventura River pumpers and folks affected by the adjudication is there has been no settlement of those issues, and the cross complaint continues in place, and the adjudication continues to move forward with respect to determining water right allocations of all the pumpers in the upper watershed. And so that's the bad news.
Can I make one small correction?
Yeah, absolutely.
The form that each parcel owner is going to receive about how to proceed in this issue is going to go to every single parcel owner because they are a water right holder. The water beneath their property is going to be adjudicated. And whether the form that, it hasn't been actually completed yet, but basically what's going to happen is that every single parcel owner in the Ventura River watershed is going to have to pay $400 and change to send back in the completed form. When that happens, Armageddon starts. It'll be a very difficult process. And I pity Matt Liver running for the supervisor's seat, because when they find out he's the mayor of Ventura and he allowed this to happen, boy, there's not going to be very happy campers out there. Bruce?
Comment, I looked through the list of all property owners, and it's not all the property owners in the watershed, it's property owners that have, that might be along streams or water courses that are tributary to the Ventura River. So I looked for my name in there, I didn't see it, but people who live across the street from me who are along a water course are listed.
Well, I think if you check what Gary Tanaka, who works for BBK, did in the Antelope Valley, that's the model for what's going to happen here, I believe.
Well, I read through the draft notice, and it lists all the property owners. My name's not there, but my neighbor across the street is, and it's because they're along the water course, because it could be tributary, they could
Okay.
claim a right because it's tributary, but I can't claim a right. I'm in the watershed, but I'm not over a groundwater basin, so I'm not part of it.
Well, wait and see. Don't hold your breath, okay?
Well, so it sounds to me, and I'm by no means very familiar with what's been going on, because the agency hasn't decided to join, but it sounds, based on what you're saying, is if you're not overlying a basin and you're not tributary to a stream, or you're not riparian to a stream, then you weren't included. So they were very selective into they identified as parties to the lawsuit. But if you do overlie a groundwater basin, then I think then you will be brought into the lawsuit if you haven't already. And what, Russ, I think you're talking about is the form answer that the court must approve for parties to make their appearances in the adjudication. And I think what you're saying is when that form gets approved, and then the court filing fee to make an initial appearance is usually around $400 or so.
$435, yeah.
Yeah, and that's when everybody's gonna realize that, they can't avoid this anymore, and this is a real problem for them.
If they want to make an appearance.
Well, there's in the
You're absolutely
form.
right.
In the form, I understand that there are a couple of different ways that you can respond. You can voluntarily say, yes, I will accept a de minimis amount of water that I could use on my property, and, oh, by the way, here's your $435 to let me do that. And the other one is to get yourself an attorney and join the club.
Bruce, are you saying that even property owners that are not pumpers
Yes,
will be getting this notification?
I believe so.
If you overlie a groundwater basin, yes.
Oh, by basin, huh?
Yeah, yes, you
So
will.
everybody in the city of Ojai is gonna get
Yeah.
this notice.
Cool, I like that.
If you have
That is
property.
gonna explode.
You are right, Eric.
So any potential property owner who may want to drill a well at some point in time.
Well, look, I live in Miners Oaks. I'm over a basin. I'm over the Upper Ventura River basin, and there aren't many of us that aren't.
That's right, up here.
So,
And there are many that have wells in bedrock
yeah,
that are not overlying groundwater basins. But I believe many of those parties have already been served.
Anyway,
And they haven't served all the pumpers yet either.
they couldn't do that because the form to respond to the lawsuit had not been approved. And I think there were some changes that needed to be made yet. It hasn't really been approved. It's semi-approved.
Well, the second was semi-approved or approved, wasn't it?
Yes. No, the judge had some changes he wanted to put in.
And then there's supposed to be 2 public meetings,
Right.
one of which will be in Ojai. That'll be interesting.
Big whoop. Okay. I don't want to go to that meeting.
One more question.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
The part of the settlement, again, please, what was settled?
The Channel Keeper suit against the city of Ventura and the State Water Resources Control Board. But it's not final yet.
The whole thing.
It's not final yet. There are still lots of money that have to be,
Yeah, it's only interim too, right? It's only good for 164 days. That's my understanding.
right.
The way that Robert Kwan explained it to me was, because I asked him about that, he said, no, it's actually sort of a misunderstanding. It's a permanent settlement, but there's aspects of it that are only in effect for 180
Ongoing.
days. It's, I think, the stream flow type, but really, it's a complete resolution of all claims that were brought by the original suing party,
Okay.
the Channel Keeper, and they, lit the fuse that blew up the bomb, and now they're walking away with their attorney's fees paid by the city. So,
And then the city is continuing the cross complaint.
so Channel Keeper sued the city to guarantee that there would be minimum flows, downstream for fish, and the city said essentially, well, it's not us that's taking the water out of the system, it's all these upstream users, and they filed a cross-claim for a full adjudication of all surface and groundwater rights in the Upper Ventura River watershed.
There are some things that are not part of that stream flow issue. Some of it has to do with fish passage issues. There is a pipeline in Foster Park for Casitas. It's a big pipe, and part of it is causing a fish passage problem. So Casitas is probably going to be dragged in to help pay for that. And there are some other issues that need to be taken care of to make sure that there are sufficient flows for the fish. And that takes money.
And I do understand that there is a process underway to try to resolve the issues without going to full-blown adjudication of water rights by dealing with a fisheries physical solution. In other
Yeah.
words, figuring out things that can be done in the different reaches of the watershed that would provide adequate flows for fish that would then alleviate the need to go to the mats with respect to water rights.
So Channel Keeper got the train going, and now it's full speed ahead with the State Water Resources Control Board activity, which is gonna set it in stream flowing, plus you've got the Upper Ventura River
That's
groundwater
right.
basin that has to address the same issue. So you've got at least 2 parallel tracks that are gonna address the same issue. So that's like Channel Keeper doesn't need to be involved anymore directly. Keep going.
That's right. I understand that as recently as last week, it was the State Water Resources Control Board and the Fish and Wildlife intervened in the lawsuit and now officially parties. So you're absolutely right. I think your perception of how it's,
California Fish and Wildlife? You say California Fish and Wildlife?
That's my understanding, yeah.
And who else?
And State Water Resource
State-
Control Board.
Well, they already
Yep.
were a party.
They were.
Okay, I apologize if I'm misstating anything. This is all secondhand because, yeah, I just get on the phone and I talk to some lawyers that are involved, and so I'm getting information.
We expect State Water Resources Control Board to flex their muscles in this issue, but we don't know what they're gonna do yet. All right, any other questions?
Russ, did you want to talk about the interaction of the adjudication with the GSP process that
Well,
the agency is going through?
you told me that the solution adjudication is not going to alleviate or obviate our need to develop a groundwater sustainability plan. Is that correct?
That's accurate, right. The legislature's been very clear with regard to follow-along laws that were enacted about a year after SGMA to supposedly streamline the adjudication process, and the legislature said that the adjudication process is not to be used to interfere with the GSP process. The GSP process, the deadlines are in place. There's nothing about adjudication that, changes those deadlines or changes the obligation of a GSA, Groundwater Sustainability Agency, to prepare a groundwater sustainability plan. Now, if there is a physical solution or some sort of a management solution that's arrived at in the adjudication that looks like it may satisfy the GSA's groundwater sustainability planning obligation and could substitute for that, then there's a process by which you can go to both the court and DWR to see if you can get that plan that was developed through the adjudication process approved for purposes of becoming the GSP. And but you need DWR to agree that it satisfies all the requirements of SGMA, essentially. It satisfies the fundamental purposes of SGMA and is going to achieve sustainability within a 20-year time horizon and various other type of requirements. So it would need to be a comprehensive solution in the adjudication that covered all the bases in order to then become the GSP for
Well,
the
then
area.
do basins that are already adjudicated have to submit the court order for the adjudication to Department of Water Resources?
No, previously adjudicated basins that have a management plan in place are
They're free.
effectively exempt.
Yeah, that's
They
what
got off scot-free. They were, that predated SGMA. Now, everything post-SGMA is, if you've got an adjudication, a physical solution, a final judgment, you need to go to DWR if you anticipate that that's going to satisfy your SGMA requirements. You need to get approval from DWR.
Okay.
But even under an adjudication, you still have to plan for eventual drawdown of the basin, such if you're in drought condition, you're gonna have to cut people back even though I have an adjudicated amount.
That's right.
So I think we're still gonna need a plan, even if the basin's adjudicated, you're still gonna have to have a reduction part of the plan to say, well, if you're in drought, long-term drought, and we can't sustain adjudicated levels, then what do you do? And I think then you set up an allocation plan, I think, essentially.
Well, and where the rubber meets the road is the allocation plan needs to be consistent with water right priorities. And that's where, you have this interaction, which we're seeing play out in the Las Posas Basin adjudication.
Yeah.
And the court there is struggling with the idea that, we've got this adjudication, we've got this parallel process, GSP process, where do those two intersect, and how is the court going to manage the adjudication to not, to avoid redundancy, duplication of effort, that sort of thing, so.
Well, that's good. Shall we, yeah, Bruce?
I got one more comment. As a board member on the Upper Ventura River Groundwater Agency, my goal is to have our GSP be the basis for some kind of a physical solution that might be needed in the litigation. And I think it'd be appropriate for you guys to have a similar goal. That way we can use our local controlled plan, and hopefully that'll meet the overarching regulatory mantle that might be put on top of us. And if there's gonna be some kind of adjudication, it's gonna take a lot longer than it's gonna take to put our plans together. So the first thing that's gonna happen is we have to do our plans by 2022, early 2022. Fish and, or Water Resource Control Board isn't gonna have their model available for discussion until probably mid to late 2021 now, so that can't even be used. And when, by the time the state board goes through their process, it's gonna be way after our plans have been approved and submitted. So if we do a good job in putting our plans together and meeting the important criteria that are set for us, then that could become the basis for the adjudication and the fiscal solution. Maybe not the adjudication, but at least the fiscal solution part of it, then whether the parties wanna fight out in court over water rights, that's up to them. But if you have a workable management plan for the area, then maybe that'll take the place of it. And our Ventura River Water District is still interested in pursuing its stay. We don't think the adjudication process should proceed while we're doing the GSP, because they're focused on the same issue, which is primarily the steel
Stream
issue.
flow.
And we have yet to have a hearing before the court about whether there's gonna be a stay or not.
Lots of luck. Okay, shall we get any further into depression with this issue? No? Shall we move on then? Item 10 is informational items, meeting changes. Special meeting December 11th at 3:30 and regular meeting December 17th at 3:30. Yes.
I have a question. Do you want me to see if I can change the time to 5? Is that better than 3:30?
Yeah, if that could happen, that would take care of me, anyway.
Someone who's not
Okay.
here wanted it at 3:30.
Okay, that'd be great.
I'll look into that, because 5 seems good, so I'll check that out.
Okay,
Okay.
that's all we have on the agenda. We are going to, wait a minute, let me get a clock that works here. Adjourn at 4:43. Thank you all for coming.
So Bruce, would it be hard to
Put a few thoughts together